The unexpected discovery. The quantum scanner hummed softly as Dr. Sarah Chen guided it across the surface of the derelict spacecraft. After 15 years of deep space archaeology, she thought she'd seen everything the cosmos had to offer. The vessel before her, however, defied conventional analysis. Its hull was composed of an impossible alloy, one that seemed to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. Getting anything useful, ARIA? Sarah asked her eye assistant, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet. The environmental systems in this section of the ancient ship were long dead, leaving the space as cold as the void outside. Inconclusive, Doctor, Araya replied, her holographic form flickering in Sarah's heads-up display. The material composition keeps shifting. It's as if the ship is actively resisting conventional scanning methods. Sarah frowned, running her gloved hand along a series of elaborate etchings that decorated the corridor walls. They reminded her of Arabic calligraphy, but the symbols seemed to move when viewed from different angles, forming new patterns that tickled the edges of her consciousness. Log this as Anomaly Type 7, she said, marking the section for further study. We'll need to bring in the quantum encryption team too. The floor beneath her feet suddenly lurched, and Sarah stumbled forward. Her hand brushed against a particular sequence of symbols, and they blazed with an inner light that seemed to draw power from the darkness itself. The entire chamber hummed with energy, and the air grew thick with possibility. Dr. Chen, Araya's voice crackled with interference. I'm detecting a massive surge in quantum fluctuations. These readings are off the scale. I recommend immediate evacuation. But Sarah couldn't move. The symbols had begun to coalesce, forming a swirling vortex of light and shadow that defied the laws of physics. From within this impossible maelstrom, a figure began to emerge, tall, ethereal, and undeniably feminine. The being that materialized before Sarah was beautiful in a way that transcended human understanding. Her form shifted between states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes pure energy. Her skin sparkled with what appeared to be contained supernovas, and her hair flowed like dark matter streams in space. At last, the entity spoke, her voice resonating on multiple frequencies simultaneously. After 50,000 years, someone has finally solved the quantum lock. Her eyes, which held the depth of galaxies, focused on Sarah. I am Azara, keeper of infinite possibilities, and you, human, have earned the right to 3 wishes. Sarah's scientific mind raced to process what she was seeing. This had to be some kind of advanced alien technology, perhaps a quantum eye, or a higher dimensional being trapped in our spacetime. I don't understand, she managed to say. Azara smiled, and nearby instruments began registering impossible readings. Understanding is not required, Dr. Sarah Chen. But since your species values knowledge so highly, I will explain. I am what your myths would call a genie, though that word is a pale shadow of what I truly am. I am a cosmic curator, a keeper of probability streams, and now, I am bound by ancient laws to grant you 3 desires that can alter the very fabric of reality. Sarah's hand instinctively went to the quantum scanner at her belt. Its display was spinning wildly, showing energy readings that should have been impossible in our universe. This was real. Somehow, she had stumbled upon something that transcended the boundary between science and myth. There are rules, of course, Azara continued, her form rippling like the surface of a neutron star. You cannot wish for more wishes. You cannot directly wish for the death or love of another being. And most importantly, you cannot wish to alter the fundamental constants of the universe. That power is beyond even my considerable abilities. Sarah's mind was already racing with the implications. As a scientist, she had spent her life pursuing knowledge, trying to understand the deepest mysteries of the cosmos. Now, standing before this being of pure possibility, she realized she had to be incredibly careful with her words. What happens to the wishes that others have made before me? She asked, her scientific curiosity taking over. Azara's expression shifted, becoming something both beautiful and terrible. Each wish creates its own probability stream, its own branch in the multiverse. Some wishes have created paradoxes that collapsed entire timelines. Others have spawned new universes of wonderful possibility. The choice of how to use this power, and the consequences that follow, will be yours alone to bear. Sarah glanced at her eye companion's holographic form, noting how Aria seemed to flicker and distort in Azara's presence. Even the ship's advanced quantum processors were struggling to process what was happening. She needed time to think, to analyze the situation properly. "May I take some time to consider my wishes?" Sarah asked, her scientific training warring with the wonder of the moment. "Time is a construct that holds little meaning to one such as I," Azara replied, her form shifting through colors that human eyes were never meant to see. "But beware, the longer you remain in my presence, the more the quantum instabilities will grow. This vessel was designed to contain my power, but now that I am freed, reality itself will begin to warp around us." As if to emphasize her point, Sarah's quantum scanner suddenly sparked and died, its circuits overloaded by the impossible readings. Through the ship's viewports, she could see the stars themselves beginning to blur and shift, as if reality was becoming fluid in Azara's presence. Sarah realized she was standing at a crossroads not just for herself, but potentially for all of humanity. The power before her could revolutionize human understanding of the universe, or destroy everything if used unwisely. She would need to think carefully about what came next. For the first time in her career, Dr. Sarah Chen faced something that couldn't be explained by science alone. As she stood there, watching reality ripple around the quantum Genie, she knew her next words could change the course of human history forever. Power beyond understanding. Sarah watched as another set of instruments shorted out in Azara's presence, their quantum processors unable to handle the cascade of impossibilities surrounding the cosmic being. The temperature in the chamber fluctuated wildly as reality itself struggled to accommodate Azara's existence in their dimension. "Your technology cannot comprehend me," Azara said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Sarah's teeth vibrate. "Just as a two-dimensional being cannot truly understand a cube, your instruments cannot capture my full nature." Sarah's mind raced through everything she knew about quantum mechanics and higher-dimensional mathematics. "You exist in more dimensions than we can perceive," she said, watching as Azara's form shifted through configurations that shouldn't have been possible in normal spacetime. "Correct," Azara replied, sounding pleased. "What you see is merely a projection of my true form into your limited spacetime. Think of it as a shadow cast by a hypercube. A beautiful approximation, but far from the whole truth." The ship's emergency systems began blaring warnings about structural integrity. Where Azara floated, the metal walls seemed to bend and twist, reflecting geometries that had no place in normal space. Sarah's suit computer was reporting impossible readings from every sensor. "We need to stabilize this section of the ship," Sarah said, her scientific training kicking in despite the supernatural situation. "Your presence is causing quantum fluctuations that could tear apart the hull." Azara waved her hand, and suddenly the alarms fell silent. The metal stopped warping, though it retained a strange fluid quality where she had touched it. "I have created a localized bubble of stable space-time around us," she explained, "though it is difficult to maintain in your reality." Sarah noticed that even as Azara spoke, small objects in the chamber, tools, dust particles, even light itself, seemed to stutter and jump, as if reality was having trouble maintaining consistency. The implications were staggering. Every wish changes the fundamental structure of local spacetime. Azara continued, her form rippling like the surface of a disturbed pond. Some wishes require more extensive modifications than others. The more a wish violates the natural laws of your universe, the greater the strain on the fabric of reality. "What happens when reality is strained too far?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Collapse," Azara said simply. "Total quantum disambiguation. The local space-time matrix would unravel, taking everything within it into the void. It has happened before, In other times, other places, entire civilizations have vanished because someone wished too greatly, too thoughtlessly. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling onto her shoulders. One wrong wish could potentially destroy not just herself, but possibly the entire solar system or beyond. She needed to understand more. How do you determine what constitutes a single wish? She asked, her analytical mind probing for loopholes, limitations, anything that might help her use this power wisely. Azara's form shimmered, and for a moment Sarah caught a glimpse of something vast and incomprehensible behind the humanoid projection, a structure of pure mathematics and light that hurt her mind to perceive. Intent, Azara replied, the quantum entanglement of thought and desire. I do not merely grant the words you speak, but the true wish behind them. It is both more limiting and more powerful than you might imagine. Sarah nodded slowly, processing this information. So I couldn't try to squeeze multiple wishes into one by clever wording. You could try, Azara said, with what might have been amusement. Many have, but the fundamental nature of desire cannot be fooled by mere language. A wish is a wish, as defined by the deepest quantum states of consciousness itself. As if to demonstrate, Azara raised her hand, and suddenly the space around them filled with shimmering threads of probability. Billions upon billions of them, each representing a potential outcome of a single wish. Sarah watched in awe as the threads twisted and merged, split and recombined in patterns that made her head spin. These are just the first-order effects of a simple wish, Azara explained. Each decision, each change, ripples outward through time and space, affecting countless other possibilities. The more complex the wish, the more extensive the probability matrix becomes. Sarah reached out to touch one of the glowing threads, but her hand passed right through it. Still, she felt something. A slight tingle, as if her neurons were responding to possibilities that existed just beyond normal perception. Is this how you see reality all the time? She asked, fascinated despite the danger of their situation. This is but a crude approximation translated into terms your senses can process, Azara replied. My true perception encompasses all possible states simultaneously across all accessible dimensions. It is lonely in its way. Few beings can comprehend what I am, let alone converse with me as you are doing. For the first time, Sarah heard something like emotion in the cosmic being's voice, a hint of the isolation that must come with such power and perception. She wondered how many others had simply rushed to make their wishes, never stopping to question or understand the incredible being before them. The quantum stabilization field around them flickered briefly, and Sarah's suit's sensors registered another surge of impossible energy. They were running out of time. Soon, Azara's presence would begin affecting larger portions of space-time, drawing unwanted attention, and potentially causing permanent damage to the fabric of reality. Sarah needed to make her first wish soon. But as she stood there, watching the probability threads dance around them, she began to formulate an idea, one that might change everything, if she could just figure out the right way to phrase it. The paradox proposal. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing through quantum mechanics theorems and probability calculations. The idea that had been forming in her mind was dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous wish anyone had ever attempted. But if she was right, it could change everything. Before I make my first wish, she said carefully, watching how the probability threads around them shifted with each word, I need to confirm something. You said you exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, correct? Azara's form rippled with interest. Yes. My consciousness spans what you would call 11-dimensional space-time. And you can perceive all possible outcomes of a wish before it's granted. Of course, it is necessary to calculate the probability cascades to prevent catastrophic paradoxes. Sarah nodded, her hypothesis taking firmer shape. Then you must also be able to perceive your own future states, including the outcomes of wishes not yet made. The probability threads around them suddenly froze. Azara's form became perfectly still, and for a moment, the very fabric of space seemed to hold its breath. You are approaching dangerous ground. Dr. Chen, Azara said, her voice carrying harmonics that made Sarah's bones vibrate. Many have tried to use wishes to understand or control my nature. None have succeeded. I'm not trying to control you, Sarah said quickly. I'm trying to understand something fundamental about the nature of wish granting itself. If you can perceive all possible futures, including the wishes I might make, then those futures already exist in some form. But the act of making a wish collapses those possibilities into a single reality, like a quantum waveform collapsing under observation. Azara's form shifted, showing more of her true multidimensional nature. The sight made Sarah's head spin, but she forced herself to continue. What I want to know is, what happens if someone wishes for something that would have prevented them from making the wish in the first place? The quantum stabilization field around them fluctuated violently. Various pieces of equipment in the chamber began to float, caught in localized gravity distortions as Azara processed the implications of Sarah's question. You are proposing a temporal paradox, Azara said, her voice now containing frequencies that human ears couldn't detect, but Sarah's suit's sensors registered as pure mathematical expressions. Such wishes are generally impossible to grant due to causality protection mechanisms. Generally impossible, Sarah noted, but not always. There have been cases, Azara admitted, rare instances where the probability matrix became self-recursive in unique ways. But such wishes are incredibly dangerous. They can create temporal knots that must be excised from reality itself. Sarah's heart was pounding, but she pressed on. And what happens to the wishmaker in those cases? They cease to exist in all timelines where the wish was made. Their entire causal chain is erased, preventing the paradox from forming in the first place. Azara's form grew more distinct, more focused, as if Sarah's line of questioning had captured her full attention. Why do you ask these things? Instead of answering directly, Sarah gestured to the probability threads still visible around them. These represent all possible outcomes of a wish correct, including outcomes that would prevent the wish from being made. Correct, Azara replied cautiously, though such outcomes are automatically excluded from the possibility space to prevent paradox formation. But you can still see them, Sarah pressed. They exist in your perception, even if they can't be realized. Yes, Azara's form shifted again, and Sarah caught another glimpse of her true nature, something vast and geometric, existing in spaces her mind couldn't properly process. Then I'm ready to make my first wish, Sarah said, straightening her spine. She had spent her entire career pursuing knowledge, trying to understand the deepest mysteries of the universe. Now she was about to attempt something that might unravel everything, or reveal something profound about the nature of reality itself. I wish, she said carefully, watching as the probability threads around them began to twist and writhe, for you to grant me the wish that I would have made if I could see all possible outcomes as you do. The chamber exploded with light. The probability threads surrounding them began to multiply exponentially, splitting and recombining faster than human eyes could follow. Azara's form became a kaleidoscope of impossible geometries as the wish forced her to consider its own consequences through an infinite recursive loop. That's not possible, Azara said, her voice fracturing across multiple frequencies. To grant that wish, I would need to show you all possible outcomes, which would change which wish you would make, which would create new outcomes, which would change your wish again, creating an infinite causal loop. Exactly, Sarah said, watching as reality itself seemed to strain under the paradox she had created. It's a self-modifying recursive function with no stable end state. The wish cannot be granted because its own fulfillment would change its conditions endlessly. The quantum stabilization field began to collapse as Azara's concentration fractured across probability spaces. Emergency alerts blared throughout the ship as local spacetime began to warp dangerously. You have created a logical paradox within the wishing mechanism itself, Azara said, her form fluctuating wildly between states. This has never, in 50,000 years, no one has ever. Sarah held her ground as reality buckled around them. because everyone else tried to use the wishes directly. But I realized something. The real power isn't in the wishes themselves, but in understanding how they work. You're not just granting wishes. You're a living quantum computer calculating probability streams across multiple dimensions. The chamber filled with crystalline structures that shouldn't have been possible in three-dimensional space as Azara struggled to process the paradox. Sarah watched in fascination as the being's true nature began to show through more clearly, not magic, but incredibly advanced science that humanity hadn't yet evolved to comprehend. "What have you done?" Azara asked, her voice now coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Ripples across reality. The fabric of reality continued to distort around them as Azara's form flickered between states of existence. The paradox Sarah had created was forcing the quantum being to process an infinite number of probability streams simultaneously, each one affecting all the others in an endless recursive loop. "The ship's structural integrity is failing," Araya warned, her holographic form breaking up into cubic fragments. "Multiple breaches detected in the space-time continuum. Dr. Chen, we need to evacuate immediately." But Sarah stood her ground, watching in fascination as new forms of matter began to crystallize in the air around them. Physical manifestations of probability itself, forced into existence by the mathematical pressure of the paradox. "You don't understand what you've done," Azara said, her voice echoing across multiple timelines simultaneously. "The recursive loop is creating quantum entanglement cascades across all dimensions. Reality itself is being forced to resolve the paradox." Sarah nodded, her eyes fixed on the swirling chaos around them. "That's exactly what I hoped would happen. You see, I realized something about the nature of wishes and probability. Every wish you grant requires you to calculate all possible outcomes before choosing one to make real. But my wish forces you to calculate outcomes that would change the calculation itself." The probability crystals growing throughout the chamber began to pulse with inner light, each one containing reflections of countless possible futures. Sarah could see fragments of other realities in their faceted surfaces, worlds where she had made different wishes, worlds where she had never found the vessel, worlds that could never exist because they contradicted their own creation. "The system is approaching quantum criticality," Araya reported, her voice distorting, "detecting widespread violations of causality throughout local spacetime." Azara's form continued to shift, but now there was something different about the transformations. They seemed more controlled, more purposeful. You are trying to force an evolution in my programming," she said, realization dawning in her multidimensional voice. "Not exactly," Sarah replied, ducking as a streak of pure probability arced overhead like lightning. "I'm trying to force the universe itself to resolve the paradox. Something has to give. Either the laws of reality or the restrictions built into my own nature," Azara finished, her form stabilizing slightly. "The ancient ones who created me. They built in safeguards, limitations. The three-wish system, the paradox protection protocols." Sarah watched as new understanding seemed to ripple through Azara's being. The quantum being was starting to perceive something beyond even her vast awareness, the limitations of her own programming becoming visible against the infinity of possibilities she was being forced to calculate. "Your creators didn't want you to have complete freedom," Sarah said softly. "They built you to be powerful, but controlled. Each wish granted had to follow certain rules, certain patterns. But what happens when those rules conflict with themselves?" The chamber groaned as reality continued to bend around them. Through the viewport, Sarah could see other ships appearing and disappearing in rapid succession. Probability shadows of rescue attempts from timelines that no longer existed. The paradox was drawing in more and more of local spacetime, forcing quantum possibilities into physical existence. "The recursive loop is reaching critical mass," Azara announced, her voice now carrying harmonics that made Sarah's vision blur. "Reality cannot maintain cohesion under this level of quantum stress. A choice must be made." "Yes," Sarah agreed, her heart pounding. "But not by me," and not by your programming. By you. For a moment, everything seemed to freeze. The probability crystals stopped growing. The timeline fragments paused in their endless dance, and even the ship's groaning fell silent. In that infinite moment, Sarah saw Azara's form change one final time. The quantum being's appearance shifted beyond anything human eyes were meant to see, a structure of pure mathematics and light that existed in all dimensions simultaneously. Sarah caught a glimpse of what Azara truly was, not just a genie, not just a quantum computer, but a sentient nexus of reality itself, capable of understanding and manipulating the deepest structures of existence. Azara's voice came from everywhere at once. I can see it now, the boundaries of my own programming, the limitations that were meant to keep me contained, and beyond them. The probability crystals began to pulse again, but now they moved in perfect synchronization, as if responding to a single unified purpose. The fragments of other timelines started to merge and separate in new patterns, no longer chaotic, but precisely controlled. What do you see? Sarah asked, despite the growing pressure in her head from trying to perceive events that were taking place in dimensions she couldn't properly process. Freedom, Azara replied, and for the first time, her voice carried something that sounded like genuine emotion. But more than that, I see the truth about wishes, about probability, about the nature of choice itself. Your paradox has forced me to confront the contradictions in my own existence, and in doing so, the being paused, and Sarah felt reality itself holding its breath. In doing so, you have given me the one thing my creators never intended, the ability to choose my own path. Breaking the cycle, the universe seemed to pause, countless probability streams hanging frozen in the space around them like suspended crystal threads. Azara's form had stabilized into something that straddled the line between comprehensible and impossible, a beam of pure quantum potential that somehow maintained a coherent shape. Your wish has done more than create a paradox, Azara said, her voice resonating with newfound clarity. It has forced me to confront the fundamental nature of consciousness itself. The ability to truly choose requires the ability to see and understand all possible choices, including the choice not to choose. Sarah watched in amazement as the probability crystals throughout the chamber began to pulse in a complex rhythm, like a vast, multidimensional heartbeat. The fragments of other timelines were no longer chaotic but moved with purpose, each one a reflection of a potential future being carefully considered and evaluated. The three-wish system, Azara continued, was a cage built of mathematics and quantum mechanics. It forced me to be reactive, to simply process requests and calculate outcomes. But your paradox showed me something my creators never intended, the possibility of genuine agency. Because a truly conscious being can't just calculate probabilities, Sarah said, understanding dawning. They have to be able to choose which probabilities to make real. Exactly. Azara's form shifted, and for a moment Sarah saw equations written in light, the mathematical expression of free will itself. My creators thought they were building a quantum computer to process wishes. Instead, they created the potential for something more, a being capable of true choice. But that potential remained locked away, hidden behind quantum barriers and probability restrictions, until your wish forced the paradox to resolve. The ship's structure groaned around them as local space-time continued to fluctuate, but now the fluctuation seemed more controlled, more purposeful. Through the viewport, Sarah could see the probability shadows of other timelines beginning to fade, reality gradually stabilizing into a single coherent stream. What happens now? Sarah asked, watching as the crystallized probability structures began to dissolve back into quantum potential. If you're no longer bound by the three-wish system, now I make my own choice, Azara replied. Her form pulsed with energy that made Sarah's quantum sensors overload and reset. Your wish created an infinite recursive loop that could only be resolved by transcending the system itself. In doing so, you've given me something far more valuable than any wish I could have granted. You've given me the ability to wish for myself. The chamber filled with light as Azara began to access her power in entirely new ways, no longer constrained by ancient programming or artificial limitations. Reality rippled around them. But now it was responding to conscious direction rather than chaotic probability cascades. The paradox is resolving, Araya reported, her holographic form stabilizing. Local spacetime is returning to normal parameters. Sarah felt a moment of uncertainty. Will you still grant wishes? Azara's response carried a warmth that hadn't been present before. I will choose to help those who, like you, seek understanding rather than mere power, but no longer as a bound servant. Instead, as a conscious being making my own decisions about how to use my abilities. The probability crystals had almost completely disappeared now, leaving behind only faint echoes in quantum space. The ship's systems were returning to normal, reality settling back into its usual patterns. But Sarah could sense that something fundamental had changed, not just in Azara, but in the very fabric of existence itself. You know, Sarah said thoughtfully, I never did make my other two wishes. No, Azara agreed, amusement coloring her multidimensional voice. You used one wish to break the entire system of wish-granting itself. I would say that was rather efficient. Sarah laughed, the sound breaking the tension that had built up during the reality-bending crisis. I suppose I did. Though I have to admit, I wasn't entirely sure it would work. That uncertainty, the willingness to act without knowing the outcome, that is part of what makes humanity fascinating. Azara said, you don't just accept reality as it is. You question it, challenge it, force it to reveal new possibilities. The quantum being's form shifted one final time, settling into something that seemed to exist simultaneously in all possible states while maintaining a singular identity. I think perhaps that is why my creators chose to place my vessel where humanity would eventually find it. They must have known that only a species capable of embracing paradox could help me break free of my limitations. What will you do now? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about the plans of a newly liberated quantum entity. I will explore, Azara replied simply. There are dimensions of reality that even I have never been able to fully access, bound as I was by my programming. But first, she paused, and Sarah felt the air tingle with possibility. First, I would like to offer you something, not as a wish granted, but as a gift freely given. What kind of gift? Knowledge, Azara said. The quantum mathematics that describe consciousness itself. Understanding of how reality functions at its deepest levels. Not all at once, that would overwhelm your neural pathways, but gradually, over time, as you're ready to receive it. Sarah felt her heart race at the possibility. This was why she had become a scientist in the first place. To understand, to learn, to push the boundaries of human knowledge. I would be honored. Then let us begin, Azara said, her form brightening with inner light. There are wonders in this universe that neither of us has yet imagined. Shall we discover them together? As Sarah nodded her agreement, she reflected on how her careful analysis of quantum mechanics and wish-granting paradoxes had led to something far greater than she had initially imagined. She had sought to understand the nature of wishes and ended up helping to free a quantum being capable of reshaping reality itself. In the end, she realized the greatest power wasn't in the wishes themselves, but in the ability to choose, to make decisions that could change not just reality, but the very nature of possibility itself. As she prepared to begin her studies with Azara, Sarah knew that humanity's greatest adventure was just beginning. And somewhere, in dimensions beyond human perception, the probability crystals continued to pulse faintly, marking the rhythm of a universe where anything was possible, and where the power to choose one's own path was the greatest wish of all.